So thanks again for coming out this morning. Um, what feels like a really long time ago now, with the pandemic in the middle and everything else, when I was taking classes from the Institute for Contemporary Buddhist Ministry, the unfortunately now defunct Institute for Contemporary Buddhist Ministry, um, which was run by Bubmi Sanim, if you guys don't know about that. It was a weird coincidence. Um, I'd started writing this talk. I was sitting at my dining room table writing this talk, and the clergy have a kind of a chat group, and both me send a message. I'm going to be at the service this time. I'm like, oh well, I'm going to be saying your name. So, um, in one of the classes that was at the institute, Bumi Sunim had the students watch a video of a dharma talk that was in a kind of a question and answer session with a Buddhist priest named Sokuzan Roshi. He's the founder and leader of Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery that's up in Battle Creek. I don't actually remember a whole lot about the content of the talk or the questions that were asked and so on, but there was a phrase that Roshi used several times in the course of the talk and answering people's questions, and it kind of lodged itself in my consciousness. And I think about this regularly, still, like, really often this phrase comes to mind. What he said was, "No self to affirm or promote." Now, for context, the way I interpreted this to be what Roshi was referencing was one of the teachings of the Buddha is the idea that there are three marks of existence, sort of three basic qualities that existence has. And one of those is anatman, the claim that there's no permanent, unchanging core to our being. Well, what the Buddha taught was that what our personhood consists of sort of a loose connection of constantly changing stuff. The things we listed in the Heart Sutra just a few minutes ago. The form of our body, the feelings and thoughts and impulses and consciousness that go through our mind, and all of those things are changing and all those things are evolving all the time. So no self to affirm or promote. I'd never heard this before. I'd never heard anybody say it before. I'd never read it any before. I researched it a little bit. I can't find it anywhere else. Doesn't seem to be something any other teacher says. So I'm assuming that means this is a unique teaching that Sokuzan Roshi came up with, and I found it to be really useful, obviously, which is the reason why I think about it so often. What I took Roshi to mean by that phrase was, if this thing we call self is really just a kind of a constantly churning stew, then what is there to affirm? To shout out loud, this is me, this is who I am, this is what I think, this is how I experience the world, this is my meat bag that I walk around in. Well, that's kind of pointless. That's kind of a pointless thing to do. If all these things are just going to change in 5 minutes anyway, why waste your time and energy with shouting about affirming that this is who I am? And in a similar way, to promote a particular view of yourself to other people, to kind of make an effort to try to get others to see you in a particular way, would also be pretty pointless since by the time you persuade someone who you aren't that person anymore. It's like a rock band that's on kind of a nostalgia tour trying to convince the audience that they're still the same as they were when they had that big hit back in 1993 or 1973 or whatever it was. So thinking about that phrase again, no self to affirm or promote, that made me think about, there's one specific aspect of the Buddhist teaching. It's what was referred to as the Ashtaloka Dharma. This is sometimes translated as the 8 mundane dharmas or the 8 worldly concerns. The Buddha explains this teaching in a text called the Lokavipatti Sutta, which is part of the Anguttara Nikaya, which is part of the old Pali canon texts that are used in Theravadan Buddhism and from South Asia. Thanissaro Bhikkhu gives this scripture's title in English as The Failings of the World. And this is the way he translated it. I've edited this lightly for brevity a little bit, but this is his translation of it. So if you please put your hands together in Hapchang. Monks, these 8 worldly conditions spin after the world, and the world spins after these 8 worldly conditions. Which 8? Gain, loss, status, disgrace, censure, praise, pleasure, and pain. These are the 8 worldly conditions that spin after the world, and the world spins after these 8 worldly conditions. For an uninstructed, run-of-the-mill person, there arises gain, loss, status, disgrace, censure, praise, pleasure, and pain. For a well-instructed disciple of the noble ones, there also arises gain, loss, status, disgrace, censure, praise, pleasure, and pain. So what difference, what distinction, what distinguishing factor is there between the well-instructed disciple of the noble ones and the uninstructed, run-of-the-mill person? The Blessed One said, gain arises for an uninstructed, run-of-the-mill person. He does not reflect, gain has arisen for me. It is inconstant, stressful, and subject to change. He does not discern it as it has come to be. Loss arises, status arises, disgrace arises, censure arises, praise arises, pleasure arises, pain arises. He does not reflect, pain has arisen for me. It is inconstant, stressful, and subject to change. He does not discern it as it has come to be. His mind remains consumed with the gain. His mind remains consumed with the loss, with the status, the disgrace, the censure, the praise, the pleasure. His mind remains consumed with the pain. He welcomes the arisen gain and rebels against the arisen loss. He welcomes the arisen status and rebels against the arisen disgrace. He welcomes the arisen praise and rebels against the arisen censure. He welcomes the arisen pleasure and rebels against the arisen pain. He is thus engaging in welcoming and rebelling. He is not released from birth, aging, or death, from sorrow, lamentations, pains, distresses, or despairs. He is not released, I tell you, from suffering and stress. Now, gain arises for a well-instructed disciple of the noble ones. He reflects, gain has arisen for me. It is inconstant, stressful, and subject to change. He discerns it as it actually is. Loss arises, status arises, disgrace arises, censure arises, praise arises, pleasure arises, pain arises. He reflects, pain has arisen for me. It is inconstant, stressful, and subject to change. He discerns it as it actually is. His mind does not remain consumed with the gain. His mind does not remain consumed with the loss, with the status, the disgrace, the censure, the praise, the pleasure. His mind does not remain consumed with the pain. He does not welcome the arisen gain or rebel against the arisen loss. He does not welcome the arisen status or rebel against the arisen disgrace. He does not welcome the arisen praise or rebel against the arisen censure. He does not welcome the arisen pleasure and rebel against the arisen pain. As he thus abandons welcoming and rebelling, he is released from birth, aging, and death, from sorrows, lamentations, pains, distresses, and despairs. He is released, I tell you, from suffering and stress. This is the difference. This is the distinction. This is the distinguishing factor between the well-instructed disciple of the noble ones and the uninstructed run-of-the-mill person. Gain, loss, status, disgrace, censure, praise, pleasure, pain. These conditions among human beings are inconstant, impermanent, subject to change. Knowing this, mindful, the intelligent person ponders these changing conditions. Desirable things don't charm the mind. Undesirable ones bring no resistance. His welcoming and rebelling are scattered, gone to the end, do not exist. Knowing the dustless, sorrowless state he discerns rightly has gone beyond becoming to the future shore. Thank you. So you can see these 8 worldly conditions, what they really are is 4 pairs of opposites, right? One of which the world presents as desirable, and the other of which the world presents as undesirable. Buswell and Lopez in their Buddhist dictionary, big, thick Buddhist dictionary, also point out that within each pair, the desirable one is the precursor to the undesirable one. And the undesirable one is the inevitable result of the desirable one. For example, before you can lose, you have to gain. And anything you gain, inevitably, you will lose. One way or another. So these are experiences that arise as a result of conditions, right? Things that happen, which obviously are constantly changing, which is why these are also referred to sometimes as the 8 winds. I'm sure you can see the metaphor if you think about a person as being like a ship, right? A ship blown about by, like in a storm, gaining and losing, being praised one minute, censured the next, going up and down in status like on a choppy sea. So you can imagine these things as the winds that kind of blow us around through our lives. So if you're thinking now about Sokuzan Roshi's phrase, no self to affirm or promote, in the context of these things, in the context of these 8 worldly concerns, as meaningful as I've found that phrase, no self to affirm or promote, I'm thinking now that it's actually missing something. There's another component that's being left out of it. I don't know Sokuzan Roshi. I've never met the man. I've only seen his stuff online. I've seen a couple of videos online. He strikes me as a pretty confident fellow, as being very optimistic and high self-esteem and kind of all that. So being a cisgendered white man probably helps with that somewhat, that self-presentation. Maybe this is why no self to affirm or promote kind of assumes that this illusory view of self will be kind of big and strong and public, and that the innate human tendency is to make it even bigger and stronger and more public. But if you think about those 8 worldly concerns, there's another element that could be operating. And for some of this, so for some of us, this could be a really substantial element. It might be the most important thing. What I'm talking about is fear, anxiety. Fear of loss may be so potent that we deprive ourselves of gain. Anxiety over disgrace may motivate us to avoid situations where we might gain status. Because of worry over censure, blame, we may not risk putting ourselves in circumstances where we might get praised. Fear of pain might keep us from experiencing pleasure. So it seems to me that this fear and anxiety might lead to a really different kind of response concerning this fiction of the self, the need to protect it, right? If we see this sort of contrived self that we construct and pretend in normal everyday life is really us, this thing we've constructed in our mind, if we see it as something that's tender, something that's fragile, then our inclination will be to shield it, to guard it, to try to kind of build a fortress around it, to keep it safe. If we realize that this self is an illusion, a fabrication, a contrivance, a fiction, what are we protecting? What is there to protect? So I hope that Sokuzan Roshi would accept my friendly amendment to his teaching: no self to affirm, promote, or protect. We don't have to be self-critical or self-aggrandizing if there's no self to affirm. We don't have to be braggy or humble if there's no self to promote. We don't have to be anxious if there's no self to protect. Instead, we can just be, right? We can just live. We can just live naturally. We can allow the wisdom and compassion that the Buddha taught are inherent in our humanity, in our being, to sort of come forth and guide our actions. Sangbola Shipshio, may you, I, and all beings manifest in light.